it's my honor to introduce our dynamic speaker who will make Social Security fun and educational. Never thought that could happen. Social Security may not be the biggest part of your retirement plan, but it's the oldest and most important to get right. Rob Kron is an advisor education consultant from Nuveen and is responsible for the development and the delivery of practice management, wealth management, and market insights programs. Rob has been in the financial services industry since 1990 and has expertise in all aspects of financial planning, advisor practice management, and investor education. He has appeared on CNBC, Fox Business, Bloomberg TV, and additionally, he has been quoted in a variety of national publications, including the Wall Street Journal and USA Today. Please help me welcome Rob Kron.
All right. Thank you. Welcome, everyone. Wow. 35 minutes of Social Security. You know, the Pences were debating for this segment whether to do Social Security or give you all a free root canal. Clearly, with me here, they decided to go Social Security. Actually, I think this is going to be a phenomenal use of your time. And the reason I believe that is if you think about it, every single person in this room, I would argue pretty much everybody in America, bought Social Security in complete and total ignorance, right? Think back to your first job. Show of hands of anybody here who got a buyer's guide or a user's manual for Social Security. Yeah. All right, show of hands of everyone who didn't. Yeah. All right, now who here isn't gonna raise your hand no matter what question I ask you? Yeah, that's probably most. Oh, but you raised your hand, so that's kind of a conundrum, isn't it? Look, I remember when my oldest son got his first job. Came home with that first paycheck and he's like, Dad, who's this FICA guy? And why is he taking all my money? Now, I know a thing or two about the FICA guy, so he's got a pretty good answer. But most folks don't. And so you go through life purchasing Social Security, not really knowing exactly what you bought, and clearly, when you get to the point of redemption, not really knowing what all your options are. So my goal here today is to try and make all of you more informed consumers about a purchase you've been making your entire working lives. So why don't we dive in? First, I've already welcomed you. So one of the things I've learned throughout my decades of public speaking is that any really good presentation always begins with statistics. So here are mine. I've got 182 million, 66 million, and 0. Now, a little context before we get into these statistics. Occasionally, when I've been out presenting, I've had someone comment, you know, you kind of look like, and I've heard a few things. I've heard Conan O'Brien. I've heard, with my beard, I've heard Walter White from Breaking Bad. The Richie Cunningham version of Ron Howard, you know, the one with the hair. And then speaking of hair, actually, my wife on a bad hair day has accused me of resembling the Heat Miser. So I just wanted to give you a little context around that. For 182 million, that's actually the number of people who paid the Social Security payroll tax last year. 66 million, that's the number of people who received a benefit last year. And then 0, well, that's going to be my unverified estimate of the number of Social Security presentations that Conan O'Brien delivered last year. I'm pretty confident in that estimate, but I do have to disclose it is unverified. Let's talk about those first two numbers a little bit more. So 182 million. All of you out there paying the payroll tax, what are you actually buying when that money comes out of your check? Well, you might be surprised to learn you're buying 4 different things. I think most of you are aware of the fact that you're buying a retirement benefit, right? Starting at age 62, you could begin to collect a monthly benefit. I think most people are aware of that. But you might not be aware of the fact you're also buying disability insurance. If you were to become disabled tomorrow, you might be able to collect a monthly disability check from Social Security. You're also buying a form of life insurance. They call it a survivor benefit. So if you have minor dependent children or a spouse and you pass away, there could be a benefit for them available. And then there's also dependent benefits for your spouse and dependents once you begin to collect one of those first 2 items. And if we look at the 66 million people who were receiving a benefit last year, we'll see that most of them, 48 million, were receiving that retirement benefit. $8 million were collecting a disability check, $6 million were collecting that life insurance or a survivor benefit, and the remaining $4 million were dependents of somebody who was collecting one of those first two items. And so if you're out there paying that payroll tax, you might be thinking to yourself, well, how much of each of these things have I bought? And the answer to that can be found on your Social Security statement. Now, for those of you under the age of 60, you haven't gotten one of these in the mail in over a decade. In 2011, Congress is like, wow, these things are expensive. Why don't we save ourselves some money and not send them to anybody under 60? They can go online to ssa.gov and look at it if they're really interested. For those of you over the age of 60 who haven't gone online, they're going to send one to you every year, 3 months before your birthday. Statement's pretty important to review. I mean, it gives you information about those things you bought. So there's a nice big bar chart there on page 1, helping you understand how much retirement benefit you've accumulated and estimates of what you might be able to collect at 62, 63, so on and so forth, up to age 70. But they also are making estimates in this. So I want you all to understand that the numbers there are assuming that you are going to continue to work until each of those ages, earning whatever you did last year. So like if you're not planning to work all the way till 70, the age 70 estimate might be a little bit higher than what you're actually going to get. Now, a little bit further down on the page, they'll estimate what disability benefit you could be entitled to if you were to become disabled tomorrow. If you were to pass away, they give you estimates of the survivor benefit that your dependents and your spouse would be eligible to receive. Interestingly enough, they don't give you any information about those benefits that are available to your spouse or your dependents once you begin to collect your own benefit. And so I'll spend just a little bit of time helping you understand what those are, because the statement isn't going to do that for you. Now, that section in the upper right where they give you the estimates of how much you could get at each of those ages, one of those bars is called, is the year that you're going to get what's known as your primary insurance amount. That's just a big fancy phrase that Social Security invented, but it's a really important number, your primary insurance amount. So again, it's the amount that you're on target to get once you reach your full retirement age, and it's used in all sorts of math associated with Social Security, and we'll talk about it quite a bit today. How do they come up with your primary insurance amount? It's kind of complicated. We don't have enough time today to go into all the complexity, but what you do need to know is they're going to base it on your work history. So page 2 of that statement has a summary of your work history, and what they're doing with that work history is they are going to multiply each of the years that you paid into this system by what's called an index factor. They're attempting to make money that you earned in 1986 equivalent to today's dollars, right? By inflating it based upon an inflation factor. So once they've done that for all the years that you've paid into the system, they're then going to sort that list from highest to lowest, and they're only going to keep the best 35 years of work history, okay? And that best 35 then goes into a very complicated formula that at the other end is your primary insurance amount. The reason I share that with all of you is that, and again, this could come as a shock to some of you, so I apologize. The government does make mistakes on occasion. I'm sorry if I'm the first one to let you know, but they do. And this form is not immune to mistakes. So, and officially, you only have 3 years, 3 months, and 15 days to correct an error you find. Aren't you glad they gave us the extra 15 days? Yeah. Now, if you do find an error going farther back than that, you ought to call them up and try and get it fixed, because they do have a bunch of exceptions to that rule. But my point to all of this is, if you haven't gotten a statement in the mail in over a decade, and you haven't audited that work history to make sure that they're not cheating you out of money that you deserve, well, that's a problem. Because if you don't audit your work history, guess who does? Nobody, right? This is on you. So I'd strongly encourage all of you, if you haven't signed up for your statement, please do and review that work history. And I'd share this information with everybody you know who's paying that payroll tax, because they need to do the same thing. You can sign up at ssa.gov. You'll get access to your My Social Security account, where they've got a lot of awesome stuff in addition to the statement. So I'd encourage you to explore that. But again, you need to review that statement for accuracy, because nobody else is going to do it for you. I mentioned this concept of your primary insurance amount, and then that's the amount you're able to get at your full retirement age. Full retirement age is actually a variable. It became one in the early 80s. So prior to that, it used to be 65 for everybody. But now, depending on when you're born, it's different. And the reason is because, again, in 1983, Congress was checking out the health of the program, and they came to the conclusion, whoa, this thing's in trouble. We got to make some changes. So they did. They made a lot of changes in the early 80s. And one of those was moving the full retirement age out. So now, if you're born in 1954 or earlier, you're going to have a full retirement age of 66. If you're born in 1960 and later, you have a full retirement age of 67. And then for those of you lucky enough to be born between 1955 and 1959, you got to do some higher order math in order to come up with your full retirement age. You have to add 2 months to the age 66 for every year that you're born after 1954. So if you're born in 1959, you would have a full retirement age of 66 and... All right, so math is not one of our stronger skills. All right, I get it. It would be 10 months, right? Because 1959 is 5 years after 1954. 5 times 2 is 10, so 66 and 10 months. The amount, your primary insurance amount, that's the amount you get at full retirement age. If you decide to take the money early, it gets reduced. For every month you collect early, they ding you a little bit. This slide is attempting to summarize how big those penalties are on an annual basis. So this is telling us that if you have a full retirement age of 67 and you decide to take the money at 62, you're signing up for a 30% lower benefit for the rest of your life. Now, if you decide to wait, they give you a raise for every month you wait. That works out to be an 8% annual increase. So if you have a full retirement age of 66 and you wait all the way till 70, well, now you're looking at a 32% larger benefit. How do you decide between those two extremes? Well, generally speaking, this might not come as a shock to most of you, but most people take the money at 62. And I found there are basically 3 reasons why they do that. Number one, and most popular reason why people take it at 62 is because they need the money. They literally have no other way to pay the bills, and that's why they do it. I'm going to go out on a limb, and I'm going to assume that is not your category, right? So you're going to be in one of the other 2 categories. Category 2, these are the people who took it at 62 because their brother's barber's best friend told them they should take it at 62. I was speaking with someone in October who shared a story where they were planning to wait till 70, but they took a trip to Las Vegas, found themselves at the bar at the Bellagio, and the bartender asked them, hey, how old are you? He said, well, I'm 63. He's like, oh, have you started your Social Security? It's like, no, I was thinking of waiting. Dude, you could be gambling with that money right now. He signed up. My point to that is there are a lot of horrible sources of Social Security advice out there. I would put the bartender at the Bellagio right near the top of that list. This Pence team, though, I'd put them right at the top of the list, right? They can be an excellent resource for you to understand the options that you have available to you and help you make an informed decision. Now, notice I didn't use the word make the right decision or avoid the wrong decision because they can't do that, right? They don't have the crystal ball that tells them how long you're going to live. And without that, you don't know what the right or wrong answer is, but you do have the ability to make an informed decision. And that's their goal. And that should be your goal as well. So before taking it at 62, in order to make that informed decision, I would strongly encourage you to consider these 3 factors. The first, are you actually going to stop working? That's kind of important. Social Security is supposed to be a retirement benefit. And as such, the government has a penalty system to discourage people from taking that money early and continuing to work. I'm going to talk about that on my next slide a little bit more. Longevity is obviously important, right? As those formulas showed you, if you decide to wait till 70 and then pass away at 71, well, that probably didn't work out for you, right? Or you take the money at 62 and set the new Guinness Book of World Records for longevity. Someone here is on their way, right? Like that probably didn't work out either, right? So longevity is important, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But I'm going to argue that the single most important conversation have with the folks here at Pence is for those of you who are married or used to be married, because it's a lot more complicated. And I'm going to spend some time on that. But let's just quickly talk about this penalty system real quickly. So if you decide to take your money early and continue to work, you're going to find you're now subject to something called the retirement earnings test, or some people call it the excess earnings test. Essentially, what they're going to do is they're going to look at your work-related income. So think about W-2 income, net self-employment, that kind of stuff. They will not be looking at your pension payments, IRA withdrawals, dividends, interest, capital gains, any of that stuff. But if your work-related income exceeds a threshold that they change every year, so 2023's threshold is $21,240. For every $2 that you make above that threshold, they are going to keep $1 of your Social Security check. So it does not take a whole lot of earnings for part or all of that check not to show up. And if you're going to sign up for a lower check, then you're not even going to get. Now, that might not be such a great idea. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't point out that the government didn't think that that particular rule was complicated enough for all of us. So they decided the year you reach your full retirement age, we needed a new test. You can actually make more money that year. In 2023, you can make $56,520, and then they're only going to keep $1 for every $3 above that threshold. I don't know about all of you, but that just kind of sounds like random number day in the House Ways and Means Committee to me. Now, I do need to point out that once you reach the month of your full retirement age, this test goes away. So at that point, you are free to collect your Social Security check, earn all the money you possibly can from work, and not have to worry about any of the checks being withheld. All right, so that's the penalty system. Longevity. If you are single and you have never been married, this is probably the most important factor for you to consider because the math is pretty straightforward. If you compare taking the money at 62 versus taking the money at 67 versus waiting all the way till 70, you will find that once you have celebrated your 78th and a half birthday, for every month you live past that, you will cumulatively receive more money from Social Security having waited till 67 versus taking it at 62. That crossover point for the age 70 decision is 82 and a half. So again, single, never been married, how long do you think you're going to live? All right, rock on. Now, for those of you who, however, are married or used to be married, it's a lot more complicated. It is not that straightforward. And that's where a conversation with the folks at Pence can really add tremendous value because they can talk to you about spousal benefits, something not discussed on the statement at all. Just real quickly, spousal benefits are available to a spouse. They're equal to 50% of your primary insurance amount, not the check you're getting. It's your primary insurance amount. They get 50% of that. And if they take it early, it'll go down. And if they wait, it does not go up. In order to be eligible for one of these things, you have to be married to your current spouse for at least a year, and they need to be collecting their own benefit. If you used to be married to somebody else, that marriage had to have lasted 10 years, and your ex-spouse needs to be at least 62. And then the last thing you'll need to know is that if you're eligible for both your own money and a spousal benefit, essentially you're just going to get the larger of the two. They got rid of all the kind of cool stuff you could do in sequencing those. They don't let you do that anymore. The other benefit that I want to talk about is a survivor benefit. So spousal benefits are available when both people in the equation are still alive. When one of the two people passes away, the survivor can receive the very creatively named survivor benefit. The marketing department at Social Security spent a lot of time naming these things. Yeah. So the important thing to know about the survivor benefit and what your statement will not tell you is how the amount can change. So if you were to look at your Social Security statement and you go down to that survivor section, there'll be an entry that says your spouse will be eligible for X. And X is pretty much what your primary insurance amount is. And unfortunately, there's no asterisk, there's no footnote, because that's a big, fat, juicy maybe, that amount. The amount your survivor is going to receive is essentially directly related to the amount of money you're receiving when you pass away. So if you took the money early and locked in a lower benefit, not only did you lock in the lower benefit for yourself, you also locked in a lower survivor benefit for your surviving spouse. If you waited till 70, not only did you lock in the big benefit for yourself, you've also locked in a really big benefit for your survivor. So if you are the higher earner in a married couple, or you have a good relationship with the higher earner in a married couple, right? Make sure they understand how this survivor benefit works, because the statement doesn't tell them. And it is one of the biggest regrets I hear from people who didn't understand how it worked. And again, talking with the folks at Pence, that is absolutely something they'll make sure they discuss with you. Now, I mentioned this discussion with them about when should you take the money. And essentially, the conversation should involve a number of these elements, right? What does longevity look like? What does the lack of longevity look like? What does some longevity look like? We don't know which one you're going to get, but ideally, we'd like to pick a strategy that works out fairly well in either scenario. They're going to want to know all the benefits you're eligible for. So if you're single, but you used to be married to someone else, there's going to be a conversation around that. If you're married, you have dependent children, there'll be some conversation around that, right? Garbage in, garbage out. If we don't have all the information necessary, we can't necessarily give you the best possible answer. So, and then the kind of one of the most important parts from my perspective is giving you some way of judging, well, what does one course of action look like versus another? And I have found that showing you what the lifetime cash flows look like is oftentimes the most compelling, in the sense of how much money would we get from the federal government if we both took it right away at 62 versus having one or more of us wait. And what does that look like with a lack of longevity? And what does that look like with longevity? And as I've looked at these things over the years, that range can be very different depending on the couple. It can be, $30,000 to $50,000, which might be a big bucket of who cares. It could be north of $300,000. It completely depends. And so understanding that trade-off is key, in my opinion, to making that informed decision. Now, step 4 is review it in and within context, because as Layla mentioned earlier, part of her discussions with you and the rest of the team's discussions with you is not only what are we doing with Social Security, but how does it fit into the larger retirement income plan you have? And so when you have this cash flow information, all right, we could have X amount if we take it right away, Y amount if we wait, and that delta is $287,000. The question might be, do you want to risk leaving $287,000 to your least favorite beneficiary, Uncle Sam? Right? Nobody likes leaving money to that guy. And essentially, by taking it at 62 and having average life expectancy, that's the risk you're taking. And you might be okay with that, and you might not. But that's the whole point of this process and this conversation, is so at the end of it, regardless of what you do, you're doing so with your eyes wide open, and you're making that informed decision about a purchase you've been making your entire working lives. Now, I do want to spend a little bit of time talking about the divorce benefit. I kind of hinted at it when we talked about spousal benefits, right? That if you were married to somebody else for at least 10 years. So what I'd like to do right now is I'd like to ask each, this is, by the way, my favorite part of this whole presentation. The reason I love this part so much is I'm pretty sure when I'm done with it, every single one of you is going to be able to call up at least one person that you know, and you are going to let them know about money they didn't know they were entitled to. And if you position that properly, that's got to be good for at least a bottle of wine, if not a full dinner, okay? So let's put our thinking caps on. I'd like you to think about anybody you know that meets the following 3 criteria. First, they were married to somebody else for at least 10 years. Criteria 2, both the person you're thinking about and their ex-spouse have obtained the age of 62. And then my final criteria is the person you're thinking about is currently unmarried. Doesn't matter about the ex-spouse. Ex-spouse could have gotten remarried. That is not relevant. Anybody that comes to mind, you should call them up and let them know they might be entitled to a spousal benefit based upon the entire work history of their ex-spouse. Not just the period of time they were married to them, but the entire work history. And there is not a divorce decree on this planet that can prevent them from collecting that money. And once the ex-spouse passes away, well, as long as the person you're thinking about isn't the reason for their demise, all right? I have to point out that Social Security does not send checks to penal institutions or sanitariums. So as long as the person you're thinking about didn't have anything to do with it, or they didn't get caught, they would be entitled to a survivor benefit based upon their entire work history. And as a quick recap, right, the spousal benefit was 50%, the survivor benefit's the whole enchilada. Now, a couple things to keep in mind before you make your phone calls. 10 years of marriage is non-negotiable. 9 years, 11 months, 30 days does not count. 62 is the criteria for that spousal benefit. The ex-spouse does not need to be collecting their benefit. They just need to have turned 62. And unmarried is really important. If you do share this information with someone and they begin to collect a benefit off of an ex-spouse, you need to let them know that if they do find the new love of their life, the moment that they say, I do, they will be unhitching their wagon from the ex-spouse and immediately hitching it up to the new spouse. I'm actually surprised that the dating sites haven't added primary insurance amount as one of the input fields, right? You'd think you'd want to know that, right, before you jump in. So anyway, food for thought. Put your list together and, schedule some dinners for the rest of the year. There are a lot of people out there who have no idea they're eligible for this money because when they open up their Social Security statement, there's nothing on it that tells them about it. So I would argue this is your civic duty to let them know. All right. I often will get the question, hey, and this kind of goes back to the reasons why people take it at 62. This would be kind of, I would assume, in the middle camp, the people who took the bartender at the Bellagio's recommendation. There's also a group of people who are like, I heard this thing's going broke. Shouldn't I just get some while the getting's good? So let me talk about that. Let me talk about this notion of solvency. Anybody here want to take a guess at how much revenue Social Security brought in 2021? Anyone? Just throw out a number. $1 trillion. Excellent number. 1.088. You almost got it right. Expenses. A little bit more than that. Just a little bit. Now, here's what's interesting. This is the first time since the early 1980s that this equation was backwards. Literally, from 1984 all the way to through 2020, we were bringing in more money than we were paying out. And as a result, we had a lot of money in this trust fund. Now, we took a little bit out of it because of this delta in 2021, so we dropped down to $2.85 trillion. But essentially, if you look at the history of the trust fund, it was almost non-existent in the early 80s. And with all those changes that they made, because here's a little context for you. Just like today, we're hearing, hey, this thing's in trouble, it's running out of money, something needs to get done. That was exactly the exact same scenario back in the early 80s. It wasn't quite as dire. They weren't going to have to cut everybody's benefit as dramatically as they're projecting this time around. But it's what motivated Congress, Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill, to come together and Alan Greenspan referee it to make all the changes they did. And the result of all those changes essentially created this massive surplus. The problem is the equation isn't working right now, right? We're not bringing in enough money to pay everything that has to go out the door. And right now, Social Security is not allowed to borrow money to pay benefits. They're only allowed to pay what they bring in. So that's why you're hearing, well, if come 2034 or 2035, if nothing else changes, everybody's benefit's going to get cut between 20 and 25%, because that's how the program is set up. Now, the likelihood of that happening, I would say, is pretty much as low as possible, because I think you're all aware that Congress is motivated by self-preservation. And if they let every Social Security recipient experience a 20 to 25% cut to their benefit, what do you think the chances of them being in office next time around are? I think pretty low. So they're going to do something. I don't know when they're going to do it. My crystal ball is no better than anybody else's. My point here is please don't take the money early because you think the check's going to bounce, because it's not. So that's solvency. We got a few minutes left. This is just showing you the breakdown of the revenue that came in 2021. You'll see most of it is payroll taxes, 90%. A little bit is income tax. That was another change, by the way, they made in the early 80s. They started applying a federal income tax to Social Security benefits that didn't exist prior to that. So we get a little bit of income from that. And then we've got interest from the trust fund right now, making up the rest of it. But we're just started to eat into principal, and they're projecting that that principal is going to run out in 2034, 2035. All right, last thing I wanted to share with all of you is around Medicare, and it is the surcharges that you find yourself paying when you make too much money. So this is a chart that essentially summarizes, it's an awesome chart, right? Lots of numbers and columns, and like everybody loves eye charts. But the point of this slide is that these are cliff schedules. We have very few cliff schedules when it comes to taxation and the federal government and how they figure things out. But this is one of those few cliff schedules. And what's important to understand about it is as soon as you cross over one of the thresholds, so just for example, you'll notice here that if you're married filing a joint tax return and you make less than $194,000 in a given year, you're going to be at the lowest premium rates for Part B and Part D. $164.90 for Part B, and then whatever the prevailing rate for the prescription drug plan you pick. But if you make $1 above $194,000, you jump to the next rate. So now you're at $230 per person, and you're in an extra $12.20 per person per month for your prescription drugs. So the point of this is you should pay attention to where you're tracking in any given year if you're in Medicare, right? Because you have the ability to potentially prevent yourself from paying an extra chunk of money for a whole year. If you're getting close to 194, right, you can talk about selling something at a loss. Layla mentioned a Roth IRA and why you might want to have one of those. Well, you might want to take some money out in December to keep yourself from going over one of these cliffs. So that's the kind of the whole point here, is recognizing that this is a cliff schedule. You have some ability to control whether or not you go over that cliff. And then the other thing to keep in mind is that this is pretty much on a 2-year lag. Because what happens is the folks at Medicare don't talk to their friends at the IRS until the people at IRS are certain they know how much money you made that year. And so, you know, you've just filed your taxes, unless you extended, right? And then you've got until October 15th to finalize what it is you made last year in 2022. So really, it's not going to be until next year, in 2024, that they're really going to know for sure what you made in 2022. So they're kind of on a 2-year lag. The reason that's important is if you have a massive event, capital gain event or income event, you need to realize that 2 years from now, you're going to see an increase in your Medicare premium potentially. Now, if you had that increase before you enrolled in Medicare, they do allow you to file an appeal form to say, hey, wait a minute, that was income that I earned while I wasn't in Medicare. This isn't fair. Can we look at where I'm tracking right now? And that's a pretty straightforward process. So I'd encourage you that if you do find yourself in that boat, make sure you appeal, because you don't have to live with that massive premium if the big income event happened prior. All right, we have covered a lot of information here. My goal is not to make any of you Social Security experts, but I did want to emphasize how important it is to have a conversation with the folks at Pence about this purchase you have been making your entire working lives and how to help you make an informed decision about redeeming that benefit. So I'm sure you've all been on the edge of your seat for this particular slide, but here it is, the disclosures. I know, it's awesome, isn't it? All right, hey, thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity, and allow me to pass the baton. Otto, thank you. Thank you. There you go.